Hi, everyone. Pastor Matt here again with Wellspring Church in Madison, Mississippi, answering questions about life after death and what the Bible reveals to us about what happens when we die. What happens to non-believers when they die? Where do they go? Well, the Bible plainly teaches that non-believers go immediately to judgment upon death. Believers go into the presence of God. Non-believers go to judgment. Now, that judgment that they go to is distinct from the final judgment that comes after the resurrection of the body. We'll talk about that here before long in a different video, but they do go to judgment immediately upon death. Let's look at some Bible verses. First, Hebrews 9:27. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. Now, this doesn't specify non-believers, just as it says it's appointed for man to die once. In other words, everyone's going to die. Now, except for those, the Bible suggests, who are still alive upon Christ's return. We know that there are exceptions, like Enoch didn't die. He was taken up into heaven. Elijah didn't die. He was taken up into heaven. But in general, everyone dies. And after that, Hebrews 2:27, comes judgment. Now, one of the biggest definitive passages that speaks to where non-believers go when they die is in the book of Luke, and it's the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And this is a different Lazarus than Mary and Martha's brother that we read about in John 11. So let's read this parable because it is the definitive text for this. Luke 16, starting in verse 19 and following. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple, fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. So this is a very rich person. And he fulfilled all the pleasures of life. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores. In other words, he suffered. One who was very comfortable, one who was suffering. It's verse 21, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. In other words, he's really suffering. This is a sad state. Verse 22, the poor man died, that's Lazarus, and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. In other words, he's with Abraham in heaven. You may have heard about this notion of Abraham's bosom. That was an old kind of an English phrase that came out of this notion of Abraham's side, but it's simple. He's simply by Abraham's side. He's with the saints in heaven, which tells us we will be rejoined with fellow Christians in heaven. Will I see my loved ones in heaven? If they're Christians, you will, in the afterlife. So this teaches us that. So this man dies, and he goes to be in heaven, and he's with Abraham there. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. So this tells us that this rich man, and by the way, this doesn't say that this man was evil because he was rich. It doesn't condemn riches. We know the Bible doesn't say that there's anything wrong with being rich. What's wrong is the love of money and idolizing money and putting our faith and trust in money. But nonetheless, he dies and he goes to Hades and is in torment immediately. So the poor man with Abraham in heaven immediately, which is a different place because he's looking across the chasm, and the rich man in Hades immediately. So let's keep going. He saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. It continues. And he called out, Father Abraham, this is the rich man, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue. For I am in anguish in this flame, which speaks to what we learn later on in the Bible about eternal punishment being a lake of fire, eternal sulfur and suffering. And that sulfur has to do with burning, right? So this is a punishment that is painful, like being burned, which is an ongoing pain. You know, if you get burned on your finger stovetop, it hangs there with you. It's not an instantaneous pain and it goes away. That burn stays. So the enduring nature of the suffering. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. In other words, the tables have turned. Lazarus is the one who's comforted, and you are the one who is suffering, where in the physical life, Lazarus suffered, and you were comfortable. Verse 26, this is key. So Luke 16:26. And beside all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. This tells us that there is a time God invites us to respond to him and his love and to be saved and to have faith and to follow Jesus. But there comes a time where that opportunity ends. There comes a time where we can't just decide anymore, that the decision has been made and it has been fixed. There's a lot of teaching out there about God doesn't send anyone to hell, people only send themselves to hell. And that's true to a degree. God is a respecter of persons, if you're Arminian. But even a lot of the Calvinists would agree with this, that predestination is based on God's foreknowledge of who would respond to him. Not all Calvinists are what we call believe in meticulous providence. But nonetheless, what we're pointing out is that people who are condemned to eternal punishment, and we'll talk more about hell later, they are there because of their own choice. But however, even if they change their mind at a certain point, it's too late. It's too late. That's what this story teaches us, where it says, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and no one may cross from there to us. So, this tells us then, this little parable is very powerful in illustrating for us what happens when non-believers die. They go immediately to suffering. This is the sad thing. We're going to talk more about hell and scripture verses for hell and what it is in a later video. But nonetheless, we're answering the question, what happens when non-believers die? They go immediately to judgment and into suffering. This is distinct, however, from final judgment that happens after bodily resurrection and being cast into the lake of fire. Those are two different things. We'll talk about that again in a later video. Stay tuned.